everybody. Welcome to another episode of 10,000 Roads to Financial Independence. Today, I have Sherri and Frank Candelario. And Sherri and Frank are both used to be Seattle residents. And they are founders and the owners, founders of Kate's Housing Foundation and also the Share Housing Academy. So Kate has a PhD, is a pharmacologist from University of Washington Medical School, and is founding patent counsel for numerous biotech company. And Frank had a long career in international marketing and branding, and Frank and Sherri combined their knowledge of medicine, marketing, and branding to provide superior housing for people in need of a share housing model. And what a share housing academy is, a group of living space in a residential setting, essentially to provide homes, resources for people in recovery, foster children, age out of the system, veteran, golden people, students, and those facing justice issues. And that they kind of convert into residential housings into helping people doing basically on the road of recovery, and meanwhile making returns for our investors. And what a great model and feel good business that is, Sherri and Frank. Thank you so much for being on our show today.
Oh, we're thrilled to be here.
Awesome. So Frank and Sherri, we always ask this question, which is when you think back in your early childhood, or there's an incident maybe in your life kind of changed the trajectory of your life from maybe a corporation workers into entrepreneur, is a socialpreneur, is what it's called, who you are today. Tell us a little bit about that.
That's such a great question, because I was that kid with a chemistry set in the basement when, young girls didn't do that. And I was passionate about the idea of becoming a medical scientist, and ended up actually getting my doctorate in pharmacology from the University of Washington in my early 40s, when my two older biological kids were like getting ready to go to college. Wow. And along the way, two things happened. I met Frank in an elevator, and my older kids convinced me that we should host a Russian orphan in our home for a month. This was back in early 2000 when plane loads of kids were coming over. And they said we needed to do this. And the child that we ended up hosting, we ended up adopting. And her name was Maria Katerine, or Kate for short. You want to talk about your...
Sure. I grew up as a military brat. My dad was enlisted, and modest living. It's no silver spoon in this mouth, but we had a great growing up. And ever since I was young, I've had a burning desire to make a difference and help people. And that opportunity came one day when I was living downtown on the 31st floor of a high rise, and I got in the elevator. I decided to go down to get me something to eat. And 4 floors below me, the door opened, and a pretty lady walked into the elevator, and the door closed, and she started talking to me. And I hadn't shaved yet. My hair's a mess, and I'm hideous. But we chit-chatted, and then we chatted in the lobby and chatted outside. I'll fast forward now, and 3 months later, her son convinced her to get on a dating site, and I had already been on dating sites, and I got matched on a dating site by somebody called Warm Sandy Beach. And I thought, well, that's outstanding, because I came from San Diego, right? And I'm back and forth. Hello, Warm Sandy Beach. My name is Frank. Hi, my name is Sherri. I said, I live in Seattle. She said, I live in Seattle too. I said, I live on the 31st floor of a high rise. And she says, I live on the 26th floor of a high rise. And I said, I live at 9th and Virginia. And she says, oh my gosh, it's that person I met in the elevator. But really, this comes down to why we do what we do today. I've always gotten up at 4:30 in the morning in that part of town and served the people sleeping on the streets. I have a burning desire to help, and I would feed people on the streets. Well, anyway, and then on our first date, I was able to go into her nice apartment, and on the refrigerator in her kitchen was a picture of her in Africa serving precious children.
Wow.
And I said, man, that sounds like a good match. I got to marry that woman. 5.5 weeks later, we eloped to Kauai. And now today we have a large foundation where we are serving people on steroids.
And here was the turning point. I was actually the founding patent counsel of many major biotech companies in Seattle. And what I found along the way, and I'm good at my job, is that I was counting on having stock options turn into stock to fund my retirement.
Mhm.
But for biotech's a really iffy business, and over and over and over, those biotech companies ended up going into an acquisition and nobody was paid out.
Mhm.
And, so here I am, making a pretty good salary, but really nothing to show for it. Newly married to Frank. And, as luck would have it, I lost my job again because that's the way biotechs do, and he lost his job. And so we're middle-aged people, newly married, no W-2 employment. And we looked at each other because we were both really at the top of our field and we knew we could work doing something else. But what was gnawing at us is we'd have this big life event. That little orphan girl named Kate is now a teenager. And she had become drug addicted and started living under the bridges of Seattle. No matter how many times I took her to treatment, I would put her in a sober recovery home and she would run away. Or other times the sober homes would put her out on the curb in 15 minutes because that's what they did back in 2015, 2014. And so here we are both unemployed. You would think with all my education, I used to joke, I spent half my adult life in school and job stability, but we didn't want to start over again because we didn't trust corporate America. But what we did trust was ourselves. And we looked at this issue of Kate and all these children who are 18 to 21 under the bridge in these recovery houses that weren't run by professionals like us. They were run by other addicts. They were run by people from who had been incarcerated. And we said, we can do better. We need to do something better for Kate and the Kates of the world. Now, Kate did spend 8 years bouncing in and out of hospitals and recovery homes. But it wasn't until, I'll never forget the day, in 2015, I found a home in San Diego. It was the first home that she'd ever been put in where she stayed longer than 5 days. And she went from being one of these meth and heroin addicts under the bridge to being a healthy 23-year-old.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was in San Diego. It was amazing. It was wonderful. And I went from being this person who was afraid to have my phone ring at night, who went to Harborview, who went to all the hospitals to find her, when she got picked up. And I never, ever gave up on her, but the housing gave up on her, the treatment gave up on her. And Frank and I together, we said, okay, we're both literally unemployed, got a little bit of money, not a lot. Let's make a shared recovery house where we're going to do opposite of what people have done for 50 years. And for 50 years, the model has been other people in recovery run the house. We're going to set the rules. And our first rule is going to be no human beings ever going to be put out on the curb for any reason, even if they fail. They don't do the dishes. If they relapse, we're never going to do that. And when we did that, people looked at us like we were crazy. They said, no, that's not how you do it. And then our next thing is I have that PhD from a good medical school. Right. I happen to have done my research in the area of opioids, the principal ingredient of heroin, Percocet, morphine. And, most drug addiction isn't heroin. Mm-hmm. It's those pills in the bathroom cabinet.
Right.
And we said, we're going to let people take medication that stops those cravings. That wasn't done either in 2015.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
So
yeah,
we got contacted by Department of Corrections and they said, would you start taking our mothers who have gone to prison for felonies related to drug abuse? And we said, yes, we will, but we want to put them 2 people to a bedroom, 8 people in a house. And we want to take away all their fears that they're disposable.
I think that's so important because I think a lot of time people who are hurt in these situations are because the history, like their histories or the lack of support systems. And so they don't know how, or there's maybe even, for me, something really passionate is domestic violence. And oftentimes you don't see people leaving that aggressor because they are dependent on what they have to provide. And describe it to me a little bit more about the housing situation before you guys come on board. Like, what was that look like? Because I don't think a lot of our viewers have some ideas of what that really kind of look like before, why this solution did not work?
Well, that's a great question. And again, remember, we didn't come from this world, but we learned a lot from the young girl, Kate, the kind of housing that was offered to them and the parts of the town. So anyway, back then when we started, I like to say the recovery housing industry was like the wild, wild west. Anyone could run one. And many of them were run by people who used the income from the rents as their income. And sometimes their motivation wasn't to fix that water heater right away or to fix those broken items, see? And so we would find Kate in certain houses that we thought we could do better. So Sherri and I came up with a brilliant idea. Let's buy beautiful homes because we want to be an investor. We want to own beautiful homes, right? Mm-hmm. And put them in appreciating neighborhoods. So when you drive by a Kate's house, first thing you don't notice that it's a shared house. It's got the American flag going. The lawn is the nicest one in the neighborhood. It's a beautiful home with off-street parking. We don't have cars parked on the street. The furniture is absolutely beautiful and stunning because what we're trying to do is raise the self-esteem of the broken people that we take in. Yeah. And ironically, it seemed to work because our success rate was recognized fairly quickly by the Department of Corrections when they said they're used to 70% recidivism rate back to prison on early releases. But with Kate's houses, after 6, 7, 8 months,
virtually zero.
Virtually zero.
Wow.
It was amazing.
And we did work with women because we were getting state vouchers. And for 3 months to 6 months, we would get $500 a person from the Department of Corrections. So when we put 8 people in a home back in the year 2015, that was $4,000 to $4,500 a month with a typical mortgage payment of $1,600.
Wow.
And even though we were paying utilities, we're getting more than double gross income. And when you think of average net rent in Seattle, if you do get a net rent, right, it's typically $200 a month after you pay your expenses. Yeah. So we immediately recognized the financial potential to buy real estate. We've always been in a very superheated market, hot market, and we've been doing this now for 6 years, and we always win our bids. And so we started working on a referral system where we weren't just taking anybody in the house. It was always women who had completed therapy in prison, who were working, who were moms wanting their kids back, and they would refer their friends. So within 6 months after the first house, we had 18 women all working. We had to buy more houses. We had 3 houses. Yeah. And those houses today have double in value, but they've been full every day since 2015. Now we have 6 homes in the same area. So virtually millions of dollars of real estate.
Nice.
And the wonderful part of it is along the way, we said, you know what, we've got to change this for all of Washington State. As you can imagine, we're not always everybody's favorite people. We said, we got to change the laws. We got to make this better. And so we had heard of a national accreditation group for recovery homes, and Washington was not part of the mix. It was just starting to sweep the country. Mm-hmm. So we got together with a couple more friends and we said, let's make Washington a state that requires accreditation standards
to receive government funding.
And so we did that. And if you look at the bottom of our website, you'll see a picture of us with Governor Inslee. And in that legislation that he signed in 2018, it basically was stating 3 things. 1, there would be a fund to improve recovery homes. 2, only certified recovery homes could get state funds by the year 2023. And 3, there would be a rotating loan fund. Well, I'm on the state board for the Washington Association of Quality Recovery Residences. We just had more legislation passed because there's up to $70,000 in grants for new recovery homes, just to start one. And if you'll do a family home, $150,000 grant. So that was just signed, and that starts next year. So we've gone from being the people who said we can do better to telling the state of Washington, you need to do better.
Yeah.
And so the pivot as to how we became an entrepreneur is, we're W-2 people. We've gone to college forever, but we realized not only was there money to be made in real estate, we were changing people's lives.
Yeah.
And it was easy, because we wrote the roadmap for people to live in our homes. And we loved what we were doing. And we said in 2018, we need to teach other real estate investors how to do it. Yeah. And so that's how Shared Housing Academy was born.
Wow. So Can you tell me a little bit more about Share Housing Academy? Kind of like, does it kind of provide education for others to kind of do the same? And I'll let you continue.
Okay, now that is the goal. We've been working with a gentleman named Gene Guarino, who is like the national expert on adult family homes. And he had a vision similar to ours. He wanted to end, any type of mistreatment of the elderly in adult family homes. So he created an amazing model and an educational forum. And we've known him for years. And he said, guys, you guys are doing so much with what you're doing. Why don't you join with me and we'll set up shared housing academies so you can teach. And we've been teaching for years independently. And we wrote a curriculum. And basically what we teach for real estate investors, how to identify the right house. We want one that's appreciating, how to make that connection with the people who provide funding, how to understand how fair housing laws protect you as an investor if you're working in the recovery field. Because even in Washington state, there's actually a statute that says if you have a nonprofit organization and you have a recovery residence, you're not saddled if somebody's breaking the rules.
Mhm.
So those eviction moratoriums that have terrified all of us just don't exist in our field. The other things that we teach are those national accreditation standards, because that is sweeping the nation. How to find the ideal resident, we've wrote a roadmap for people to live in harmony together. Being from Seattle and doing yoga, our second rule was you got to live in Zen and harmony. And we always laugh because Frank and I have tried to explain what Zen is to guys who are 6'8" with tattoos everywhere. And they go, we get it. We want to live in Zen, So right now, today, we've morphed into the fact that we're serving there's more men who have housing insecurity. In fact, there's 70 million people in the United States right now with housing insecurity issues.
And that doesn't mean they're homeless. That means they're on that bubble, that one paycheck away from, being
Right.
in real housing trouble.
Which there's a lot of people like around post-pandemic and, yeah.
Oh yeah, the pandemic has been a train wreck for so many people. And, our business actually doubled during the pandemic because we started housing for King County Drug Court. And Frank and I, you want to talk about being entrepreneurs. I don't know if you've ever been there, but the courthouse doors are really big.
Yeah.
We made a little PowerPoint brochure. We printed it off our printer and we went and knocked on the courthouse doors. And we said, we think you should put your people to house with us because we've been housing people who've been incarcerated for drug crimes for, at that point, 3 years.
Right.
And we don't want them going to prison. They want them to come to our home.
Right.
And we met with them. It took about 6 months to get a contract. And that contract doubled and doubled and doubled again. And so now we're working hand in hand with the judges, and people come to us for up to 2 years at a time. And when they're done with their program and all that counseling, they get their records expunged. So they're free. And we're keeping people out of prison that way.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And you mentioned about the kind of the relapse rate and etc. You mentioned that among the houses that you have provided for the woman, basically there's zero relapse. Like, what are the secret like you can share with us over there, like at your housing that you're providing, that really kind of helped some folks to really get out that?
Well, let me clarify. I can't say zero relapse, but our program is much different. With many homes, one relapse and you're out, and you lost everything except for the valuables that they don't put out on the street. But our program is called CCO, your probation officer,
your counselor,
okay, and come up with a treatment plan. And once you can come back into the house with a clean, your analysis. Your shoes are still going to be there. Your phone is still going to be there. And some of our greatest successes, because our houses are so beautiful. I love the reaction on some of these people. They walk in our house. Oh my God, it's a beautiful house. I can't believe I'm living here. Safe neighborhood. Neighbors wave to us. But I really feel like some of them feel like I might as well go ahead and fail now because this is just too good for me. My self-esteem. And some of them relapse early. But you know what? After they realize that's not the end of the road for them, we pick them up, we get them back, and all of a sudden their confidence starts coming up. And it takes about 4 to 6 months. And if you have a job and you're living in this beautiful home, this safe home, outside your door, and 4 to 6 months, you feel middle class, you act middle class, you're treated like middle class. Guess what? They almost never go back.
And what we find too is people who have been incarcerated for a drug-related offense, and basically a lot of times as they wrote a bad check while they were under the influence, while they're incarcerated, they're in therapy. And so those people virtually never relapse. And then we've been taking the harder cases during the pandemic. We've been taking people who have just given up drug addiction the day before. So, we feel confident that we can deal with that. And our success rate, even with those people, is phenomenal because they're all on medication. So there's 2 main drugs that people use. One of them is methadone, and we have some folks who come to us on methadone, and others are on a drug called Suboxone. And Suboxone basically takes away all the cravings, and so they don't want to use anymore. The third thing we did way back 6 years ago is Kate was often told she couldn't be on her antidepressants in a typical recovery home. They don't allow you to be on your mental health drugs. So we took all comers and said, whatever you're on, your antidepressants, your bipolar disorder drugs, whatever it takes to make you feel good, you may stay on that. Now, we don't administer any medication. Nobody does. We allow adults to be adults and, manage their own medication. One thing, people ask us, well, how do you handle this? Well, we're handling it right now from 3,000 miles away. Yeah. And that was the only good thing we took out of corporate America, was learning how to empower people to manage the house. Right. And what we found along the way from day one, somebody always comes forward and says, I want to lead the house. I want to be the house manager. Right. And we would give them a little bit of a break on their monthly room fee. Right. And they'd be happy to manage their fellow peers. Yeah, definitely. Because they kind of understand each other. Now let's kind of talk about a little bit about the investment side of the things. Yes. Like, sure, when you invest in these things, because often people will I even had this said to me by partners and etc. I sometimes paint a vision for them, and they will say, well, that costs money. I don't know if investor wants to invest in that. But it's really, when you look at it, some of these plans are just making connections with resources, setting up the rules. It doesn't really cost a lot of money. But then on the net effect it's actually, there's a lot of profit back to that. Like, yes, increase their tenant retentions, or, reduce the vacancies and all that stuff. It's essentially setting up how do they say it? Like creating a whole new green field for yourself. So can you kind of tell us a little bit about how the investment side, how that makes sense? I think you allude to a little bit of that before. Yeah. So we started with using our own 401k funds. We had a little bit, we're laid off, kind of had access to it for our down payment. But we knew, because the first 2 homes we bought were basically foreclosure. So you can't get a bank loan. And so we started calling all the private money guys in Seattle, and some went, click, you guys have never remodeled a house. You're a counsel, and he's in marketing, and you want to be real estate investors. Did you see that on YouTube? And then we came across a guy, and he liked our tenacity. And he said, I've got a woman doing student housing in Medina, and she's killing it. She's got 9 people in the house, and she's charging $1,000 a person. He goes, is it the same concept? And we said, yes. He made sure we got the loan. I think our first one was like 9% and 3 points. Yeah. And, then we needed money again 2 months later when a foreclosure fell in our lap, and he got us that one. So now less points, less interest. Yeah. And then 4 months later, and so we're buying 16, it was a superheated market. So you had to have private money. You had to close fast. Right. And we came up with a third loan that we needed in 6 months. And he said, our partners aren't going to go for that. Mm-hmm. And not only that, we had convinced the owner to finance the whole down payment. So we were going to come in with nothing, beautiful home. We needed $350,000. She was going to come up with 150. I was like, we're in. And he goes, it doesn't work that way. You guys have to put some money in. And he said, but if you can get 10% together, which we did on credit cards, he found a new lender for us. And the guy he found us, both of them work with us today, 6 years later. So we always encourage people, cold call those private money guys. Right. And the guy he found for us has grown phenomenally. And he loves what we do. In fact, when I needed, and I do all the finance because that's just the way my brain is wired.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, he's the real estate guy with the hammer. But when I needed money for this house in Florida, again, super heated market, I called my $2 billion guy and said, hey, I'm going up against multi-offers. Can you write a letter that you'll close me in 48 hours? And they said, absolutely, because we've done so much business with them.
Right, right.
And it was really interesting because now we were on the phone with him and I said, I've got 3 or 4 other houses I'm interested in getting. And I said, what kind of terms do you have? He goes, how about 10% down and a 5% interest rate?
Nice.
So yeah, seriously. And so, you know, and he loves what we do. He knows what we do. He thinks what we do is just cool.
Yeah.
And he's in San Francisco. I mean, you know, so you just don't know who is going to be your backers. We are so backed financially. We can buy anything at any time in any way we want. But we started as 2 knock-kneed middle-aged adults without a lot of money, no jobs, no real estate experience, but just a desire to use housing to make a difference.
Yeah. And then the tenacity of finding out how and not being turned away from the first guy who says no. Yeah.
Oh, and you know what's so funny? I love this because they're pretty major, you know, like they're huge. And once we had a couple $1 million of real estate, we actually had a $1 million condo in San Diego because we were doing short-term rentals. I called them back thinking, hey, we got a lot of equity because we're only 50% leverage. We have all this real estate. They still said no. No. So I said, fine, it's your loss.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think it's unconventional, you know, and then and then also along the way, like if people help you doing that, it's a great business for them as well. Yeah.
We always make our loan payments. In fact, the gentleman we met in 2016 has personally lent us his personal money when we needed to close the deal.
When you have a longer radio show, we can tell you that amazing story.
But the point is, you know, there's 3 things you need in this business: know where to place your house,
Yeah,
know how you're going to pay for it,
how are you going to fill it,
and how you're going to fill it. And you know, state of Washington, actually most of these states, there is so much money, and United Way is giving money to local helplines, and they help pay room fees. But what we found, our people, once they're off any type of state assistance, pay their own room fee. They never miss.
right.
and they often say, oh, Frank, we got off probation or I graduated from drug court. Now do I have to move out of the house? And Sherri and I look at you and say, wait a minute, you've been a fantastic resident for 2 years. You've been on self-pay, never missed a payment. Why would we want you to move? You're paying our mortgage.
Right.
We're just going to go buy another house. And
Right.
that's basically it. Because what we like to say is we want to be able to buy beautiful homes in safe neighborhoods with curbside appeal. That's what we want in our portfolio.
Right.
But we don't want to rent to a husband, wife, 2 kids, and a dog. Why? No cash flow.
Right.
But as an exit strategy, we keep those houses immaculate. Those people are so grateful to live there. You'd be shocked. We've had senators and congresspersons of staff come to our home.
Oh yeah.
So our backup strategy is if we had to, and I am a real estate broker too, we could sell the house tomorrow. So really the risk is low. And we know that anytime we open up a house, we'll have it filled right away.
Right.
And that's the thing, the neighbors do end up caring about you. Fair housing rules do protect you in the neighborhood. They are self-managed if you have the right roadmap and you own the real estate. And I think the satisfaction of seeing human beings, like, you know, I think it was in the fall, we had like 3 75-year-old Vietnam vets who had nowhere to go. You know, just some of the people who have served our country and are trying to make it on SSI and can't live with us. So the shared housing model isn't just for the justice involved. We've got a house full of older women who can't live in it. They like living together. They make dinner together.
Oh yeah.
You know,
I love living together. Yes, I have tenants like that. They ended up being the best friends.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, Seattle is a great place to do this in because, you know, especially King County, there's so many areas where zoning just is very friendly. But also we have helped students start homes in many states throughout the country. And, you know, in fact, we have one student who opened up a home for LGBTQ youth, 18 to 21, because he had been thrown out of his house when he was in high school by his parent for that reason. And so he's doing shared housing, you know, and he's serving those kids.
Yeah.
That's the beautiful thing about this shared housing model. Find your passion. Is it maybe adult Down syndrome children, autism, golden people not ready for the old folks home? I mean, what is your passion? Strictly veterans? So that's the beautiful thing about our model. And we just love our residents. They're actually fantastic people.
And we've been teaching it now since 2018. So we spend a lot of time, making sure we're following where the money is going, what the stats are, what the regulations are. And in the beginning, there was no Washington Association of Quality Recovery Residences. We made that. But since we started with that, all over the country, the federal government's requiring that national accreditation to protect people.
That's awesome. That's amazing, because you're like literally changing the standard of housing for like the whole nation over here.
That's what we chose to do originally. We said, we can either get 15 houses like this, or we could change the way people think about recovery residences. And the whole thing was no more disposable people.
Yeah.
Because that's what happened to Kate. She would not have relapsed and gone homeless for 8 years if people had allowed her to stay in their homes.
Yeah. Because people make a mistake, especially people who are dependent on a drug. And I've had someone kind of come in and speak about a homeless shelter that was provided by the government before, and they literally said that, hey, like the long term, in between houses are about 6 weeks, and you're like, 6 weeks, like nobody can like even find a job sometimes in 6 weeks or 6 months even, like, and that help kind of runs out, and then all it does is kind of provided a very short-term solution, not really a solution at all. Yeah.
And one thing I would mention to all your listeners, Frank and I, even though we're married, we are definitely a business partnership.
Yeah.
We have different roles. I do the finance, mortgage, legal stuff. He's, identifying the properties, fixing them up. He's a real estate broker. Frank is with Best Choice Realty. And they early on, Rochelle Wilhite, who started Best Choice, when she hired Frank, knew exactly what he was doing, that he was not going to be listing homes, that he was going to be buying homes to start this foundation. And she has supported us every step of the way, to the point of, this is something your listeners may want to know, is that real estate commission can be a tax deduction. And when we recently sold our own home, we let Rochelle list it, and she's rebating back the commission as an investment in Kate's House Foundation. Right. So we have a nonprofit foundation, but our real estate, I want to clarify, is for profit. Yeah. It's just a relationship between a nonprofit for-profit. And we teach that also at Shared Housing Academy. It's basically a technical nuts and bolts class for the real estate investor who wants to think about a different way of housing.
Yeah. And so what is here from here on, 5 years from here, or like 10 years from here, like the large goal? What is your next goal?
It goes back to 2016. Frank said, what are we going to do with this? We have 3 houses and 18 women. And I remember looking at him and I said, I think we need to end homelessness in America. And he goes, well, that's a lofty goal. And I know, but he's great. We wrote it down. And then we realized 2 years later, to do that, we couldn't do it personally, but we could get an army of people who had a heart, but knowledge about real estate, who wanted to learn the nuts and bolts of how to do this, who could help us. Let
me share something. So we're on a stage in Las Vegas, 500 investors learning how to buy real estate. Some of them learn how to climb a tree and say, I buy. Other people go to the county to find out who died so they can, we do it differently. Our cash flow is so fantastic. We just look for the house that we want and we take it. But where was I going with that?
You're with the 500 investors.
Oh yeah, so here we are in Las Vegas on quite a large stage. And we're talking to these people who are learning how to buy real estate. But we stopped right in the middle of our speech and we said, wait a minute, how many people in this room have someone they love and care about who is struggling with addiction?
Right.
Guess what percentage of the people raised their hand?
It's like
70%.
Wow.
So there's a 70% rule out there. 70% of the neighbors in where we put our houses, they're empathetic to what we're doing. But they love us because they want to help solve America's problems by accepting us, but they don't have the consequence of one of those houses that we all know what we're talking about, you know,
Right.
that kind of lost control.
Yeah.
That's
No,
absolutely.
our goal right now, it was interesting because we have been kind of putting that out to the universe every day for 6 years. And now we know we have spoken to more than 1,000 students. You know, Shared Housing Academy is new, but it's a continuation of curriculum we've been writing for years. And people are starting houses all over America. But when we were in Florida, and we've been here 6 weeks, and we, you know, we still have our condo in downtown. So we consider ourselves Washingtonians, but we bought a house down here. And I was sitting at the table and I got a Facebook message from a woman who said, I met you 9 years ago. I've been following Kate's House Foundation, and I lead the coalition to end homelessness in a county and here in Florida. And we want you to meet with our CEO and all our directors to put the Kate's House model down here. And we have investors.
Nice.
When I looked on the map, because we're new to Florida, she's 20 minutes away. So they've got the money. They just need the model. So, you know, our main model truly is, and the government agrees, is accreditation of housing. And it's not, you know, I can't say it's not that hard. There's a lot of things to do. But if you do the package correctly, which is safe housing, you know, house rules that work, good neighbor policy, and you know what you're doing, that accreditation is, once you get the first one, it's easy to get the second, third, fourth.
Yeah.
And that's what in Florida, they require it in many states. Now, Washington doesn't require it yet. It will, but in Florida, you must be accredited to get any type of funding. Much of the nation is already where we brought Washington State.
Got it. That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm so glad to have you two on the show today. And we usually end up our show with, actually, let me just ask you this first before I get to the last segment of our show. Can you tell us how to find more information about the share homes? And I believe that you're actually traveling to Washington, Seattle soon, which a lot of listeners are located. Can you tell us a little bit more, like what's coming, like very short term, in terms of how people find you and contact you?
Well, we're going to be speaking to the REIPs group on the next week, or 2 weeks from now. I think it's the 24th. And so we're coming to speak to Seattle, but there's 2 ways to find us. Our website is Kate's, Kates House, House Foundation, FOUNDATION.org. And it's educational, but there's also a link to Shared Housing Academy on the website. And then there's a separate website where you can sign up to take a class. And I've got one more to throw at you here. Yeah. And that's sharedhousingacademy.com. Mm-hmm. But the third one, and the one I'm really excited about, is on June 19th, Anderson Advisors in Las Vegas has invited us to be the keynote speakers in an all-day symposium they're having on how to set up a nonprofit. And we're going to talk about, you know, what we've done in the world of accreditation and our housing. Yeah. But they're going to piggyback in on how you can use a nonprofit as a real estate investor profitably. And even if you don't want to start a home, how you can invest and be a passive investor. So it's going to be phenomenal. So that's Anderson Advisors. And they've got a link in there to the shared housing seminar.
That's awesome. So we'll put all that in the show notes. Our editor will put that in there. Thank you. Okay. And so folks can kind of connect with you. And I know, like, I'll probably try to look up for that Reeves event and try to meet you guys in person.
Oh, we would love it. Wonderful. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I want to meet you. I mean, and we'd love to give you a tour of the homes.
Perhaps tour our homes.
Well, I'm thinking with her apartments, you know, because one of the biggest issues we have is our people can never get into apartments after they leave us, you know, because their credit scores are low and sometimes their criminal background, even if it was years ago.
Even if they're the most outstanding resident for 3 years in our homes, they're just wonderful, wonderful people. The stigma stays with them and it's so difficult.
You know, so our next goal is to get an apartment building. I just told Frank last week, I said, we need an apartment building in Seattle so we can house our people there.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And maybe we have connections. That's awesome.
I hope so.
This is why these episodes are super awesome. This is why I do the podcast, because I meet fantastic people like Frank and Sherri. And so our last segment of the session over here, I love to kind of like ask this question. And for you guys, I'm going to change this question a little bit differently. We often ask people who comes on the show who has kids, how are they educating their kids in terms of financial freedom? But I wanted to kind of ask you about how Kate's doing, and how are you kind of like educating her and her siblings on being a better investor, but being a better social entrepreneurs. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because Kate is about probably 15 years younger than my son, who is actually in Amsterdam, and he oversees a software company in Silicon Valley. But he looked at what Frank and I did, and he's living in Amsterdam. He just bought an Airbnb in France. So
Yeah.
he kind of followed along the line. He's well paid, but he said, yeah, real estate's where it's at. Kate's doing good. She's clean and sober. She's married and has a baby. But, I would say 8 years of the struggle did take a toll from her original life plan, which was to be a violinist at Juilliard.
Yeah.
So that didn't happen. And, when I think of the lost potential for all these human beings that we house,
Yeah.
it was the loss of housing that set back a lifetime of dreams.
Yeah.
And, you ask about kids, we actually have custody of a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. And the 5-year-old has actually gone to all the Kate's houses with us, even though people are just as involved in recovery since the minute he was born.
Yeah.
And he loves the houses and they love him, and he knows the people's names. And it's real cute to see him. He was 4 and he was on Redfin.
Yeah.
And he announced, he goes, Grandma, this looks like a really good house for a Kate's house. So we're bringing him up in the business.
That's awesome. That's awesome. It's so fantastic. Well, oftentimes we have a lot of good investors that comes and talk about their journey. Like this is so far my favorite, episode here, really, because that's really connecting the hearts and the head together. And also the money, like in terms of investing and making huge returns. And I think that's the point of not everything has to be nonprofit in this world. Not everything has to be just philanthropist, but there's also money to be made in this area, which I think incentivize more investors to kind of get involved in the sector. Yeah.
And that's what we teach. We want to demystify people that you don't look like you, that you don't know. But also just the fear factor. If we do this, what will the neighbors think? They're going to love you and you're going to make a lot of money. So, it's a win-win-win. I think when you do good, you do well.
Yeah. We call it invest, get the return, but serve.
Yeah, definitely. Follow your heart. Thank you so much, Frank and Sherri. So great to have you on our show today. And I'll ask our listeners to definitely rate us on the podcast, to definitely like show up to check out Frank and Sherri's organizations, and get involved.